Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Darren, and I did not expect for you guys to enjoy the last video, the one where I talked about BFA classes with the least amount of changes. So instead of doing whatever video I was about to do, let's do another one to continue on, to just add on to the topic, to keep stoking the fire, because BFA is very exciting. I've decided to make a video on BFA about the classes with the most amount of changes. And this is for people that are kind of in the same camp as I am. If you're like me and you love things changing in your video games, being able to adapt to new playstyles and find new ways of playing the same classes we all love, then these are the classes that you might enjoy. And of course, as with the last video, I will be taking a look at different classes, so I'm looking for at least 2 specializations that have some fundamental class differences. Now, when I'm looking at changes to a class, it doesn't always have to be rotation. In terms of abilities that you spend, abilities that you maybe use to generate resource and then spend that resource, those can stay more or less the same. When it comes to the customizability and the talents and the general approach and direction that Blizzard wants to take that class, that's where we're really looking into the nitty-gritty of it. Some classes definitely have a whole new rotation in terms of the buttons you press. Other classes have small adjustments but change the gameplay a little bit. Others have a variety of talents that allow you more than one playstyle, where you can take the spec or class into any direction you want. So that's more what I'm looking for when it comes to changes, is when Blizzard really wants you to take a class in a different direction. Let's start first with Shamans, because they'll be a pretty good example of some of the changes happening to the game. Enhancement Shaman is more or less the same. You still are going to use Rockbiter and Flame Tongue to build up your resources, and then you're going to spend them on Stormstrike and Lava Lash. Your basic rotation is more or less a clean slate, with a lot of gaps to fill. Where you get to choose how you want to play is through talents, and there's multiple different talents that are all viable. Since Blizzard decided to take a bunch of talents for a lot of classes and pin AoE versus AoE, single target versus single target, utility versus utility, defensive versus defensive, you don't really have a single like row of talents of here's my single target build, here's my AoE build. You can kind of just do whatever you want, and there's a lot of flexibility. A lot of the talents are viable, and for Enhancement Shaman, they can offer you different playstyles. If you've always wanted to play your Enhancement Shaman as somebody who maintains buffs of Frost, Fire, Earth, and just self-buffing yourself and making sure those buffs never fall off, just more of a passive playstyle, you can. If you want to play more of a bursty playstyle with a bunch of abilities to combo back together, you can. So it's kind of like the whole idea of a clean slate with your choice of customizability. Same thing goes for Elemental Shaman. Elemental Shamans are a little bit more rigid in terms of they have to cast a lot of their abilities. Stand still, plant your feet, and cast. So it makes them a little bit more rigid compared to what you experience in Legion, though they changed up the spec a little bit so it's a little more consistent. It'll be more or less just like every other caster in the game. You have to stand still, get a bunch of spells off. You are going to be more susceptible to kicks, but with all the utilities and self-heals and even self-buff mechanics that spec has, you can still maintain yourself and take care of yourself. You also have, again, a clean slate playstyle. You can choose talents in order to be more passive, or if you want to, you can just go ham. You could summon a lightning elemental that will empower every single lightning bolt to get faster and faster with every single cast, to the point where you're rapid firing them, and the only time you're not pressing that is whenever you're trying to earthshock the enemy. So it has a lot of different fun playstyles. Totems are a lot more exciting, buffs are a lot more exciting, a lot more talents are viable. So Shamans, with some of the changes, is one of those classes that got so many changes where the player gets to decide how the rest of the spec could kind of finish. So it's almost like a Build-A-Bear workshop, but it's more like a Build-A-Shaman workshop type of deal going on. And as for Rest of Shaman, that's a spec that I never really played, never really got into, never really got interested in, so that one I can't really comment on. Then let's get into the Warlocks. Warlocks is one of those classes that I feel everybody knows got a few changes. The one spec that didn't get as many changes is Affliction. You're still all about putting up dots, instead now you're all about hitting the enemy with Shadow Bolt, so it offers a different playstyle in terms of mobility and not just being able to drain the hell out of the enemy. You also get to summon a pet that can extend your dots, so you really have to play around with this bursty playstyle. With some of the talents, it can be very much a dot spree, just trying to maintain as many debuffs and dots and curses on the enemy and just trying to watch him melt. Or if you want to play more bursty, you can do that too, or anywhere in between. But we're not going to talk about Affliction. The main head of the show when it comes to Warlocks, I would say, is Demonology. I feel like overall, it is the most proclaimed spec in all of BFA. And universally, it is loved by everybody. The playstyle for Demonology is a bit different. You're still spending soul shards in order to summon as many demons as possible. It's just the varieties of demons and the smoothness of playstyle that this offers becomes a lot of fun. It probably has some of the best interaction within abilities, as some abilities and mobs allow to empower your other abilities that are usually not ever pressed, but when procced, now deal more damage and are actually useful, and might even offer you a little bit more ability. There's a lot of cool talents that offer you multiple playstyles as per usual, so you can play in more than one way possible. Overall, a very smooth spec with a lot of playstyle to it, lots of demons all over the place, and you could just tell just how much effort Blizzard ended up putting into the spec, as so many people end up being gravitated to demonology because so many people love it. And then of course there's Destruction, a very good spec, for the most part has a more or less same rotation, but I really like again where the talents come in. The talents get to customize a little bit of what you want to do. For example, you can have more of a faster build where you're just trying to spend as many abilities as possible, or a more destructive build, pop a chaos bolt and then trying to deal as much damage into the enemy afterwards. If you want to, you can give yourself a rapid fire chaos bolt build where you summon an infernal and every chaos bolt will make the next stronger, and the buff will keep stacking up until like 20 stacks, so you have maybe like over 100% damage increase, something along those lines. Very, very fun, very, very exciting. It takes same ideas and same concepts of what the spec has brought in the past and tries to adjust for something new and something exciting going into BFA. Then of course we have to talk about hunters, as the survival hunter and marksman hunter got plenty amount of changes. Beast mastery is pretty new and pretty cool, and they are trying to adjust the spec, and it's one of the strongest specs in the game. But just for survival and marksman alone, it puts hunters definitely on the map for this video. Survival got a complete overhaul in terms of playstyle. No longer do you have this very confusing, very hard to grasp playstyle. They completely redid the whole thing. You have Serpent Sting back, you have grenades, you have a kill command at range, you have this range slash melee playstyle to you. You play with your pet a lot better, you are a way better melee than what you were, with a lot of talents offering you a little bit of that range slash melee capability to be able to craft yourself how you want to, with a very fun and very interesting way to play AoE, where you throw a grenade where you try to aim it at the enemies, and then depending on the trajectory that you hit the first target, it'll do a blowback from that target in a cone where you're trying to hit as many enemies as possible. You also have a pretty fun way of generating resources with focus and a new way to play. I mean, they really gave survival a melee treatment, because for the longest time in Legion, survival hunters felt like a ranged class at its heart, at its core, just given a melee weapon. In BFA, they really do try to make you feel like you belong with the rest of the melee, but because you're a hunter, they do want to give you some flexibility for that range capability. Very fun spec, very much love the overhaul, and hopefully a lot of you guys will, as I was able to cover it in previous videos. And then we got Marksman. Marksman is blended so well together into BFA. It's a blend between this very Legolas style, where you would be running across the battlefield just shooting rapid firing shots at the enemy back to back to back, but also you have the sniper mode where you have to really stand, get a cast off, but that cast off is going to be worth a chaos bolt. It's really going to be worth getting it off. And the playstyle is a lot more fun, a lot more fluid. Ever since they redid Remastery, they also put a few abilities on charges and brought back abilities like Steady Shot, so it really kind of gives an ode towards old school Marksman Hunters and what Marksman Hunters used to be all about at one point in the expansions. And I very, very like this blend here, what they got going on. Very bursty, very fun, insane amounts of range to it. It's a very fun sniper-esque playstyle with a bit of Rambo to it if you need to. And of course, for both of the specs, talents allow you even more customization of how you want to play without really too many restrictions, but the basics of those classes and the direction the Blizzard wanted to take them into BFA definitely got changed. Priest is another class that came to mind. This class no longer feels the same, and I've always had this weird love-hate relationship with Priest ever since going to Warlords as an alt, then going to Legion, not really liking the playstyle, then learning to like the playstyle. Now I'm going to BFA where I don't understand what Shadow Priest is all about, but I feel like a lot of people that have been playing and maining Shadow Priest really do like the playstyle. Shadow Priest are getting a few changes in terms of tunings for the numbers, like dots being not as impactful, and then your playstyle of Insanity, you're supposed to leave the Insanity eventually. You're not supposed to stay there and rent it out like a place. You're supposed to come in, enjoy the scene, enjoy the view, leave, come back later. So the playstyle is getting changed a little bit. Again, the talents offer you a lot more like Shamans had, a lot of customizability, a lot of flexibility, very competitive options of AoE versus AoE, single target versus single target, and they even let you play around with the whole void mechanic. Yes, you're losing your artifact weapon, which kind of sucks, but they do bring it back to talents, which is kind of nice. Overall, the spec for Priest, especially for Shadow, is something that I'm still not quite sure how I feel about it, but I definitely can say that it's brand new, and because it's so new, I'm having a hard time understanding it. And then of course there's Disciplined Priest, and I love the idea of a healer that tries to heal their allies by doing damage, except in Legion they never fully realized it. Like, the playstyle to deal damage to heal others works in raids, works in dungeons, but unless you're somebody who lives and breathes Disciplined Priest, it's kind of a hard spec to grasp. A lot of people just gravitate to Holy because it was more set in stone, it was more straightforward. And that's why I did not gravitate to Holy. I did like the discipline, difficulty, as well as the prestige of really being able to play one. Though in Legion I could never really properly grasp it enough to play it well and do anything cool about it. In BFA, however, they're really trying to stick with the spec. You dealing damage actually does healing. You don't really have to choose between damage and healing. You don't have to do this kind of half and half deal. Doing damage, good damage, will actually produce good healing, and it's awesome. I overall enjoy what the spec is all about and the different decision making that you have in terms of your playstyle. It doesn't feel kind of like a gimmick where you're trying to deal damage and you maybe will heal targets, but once somebody starts taking real damage, you really need to start healing. No, if somebody starts taking real damage, you just need to crank up your DPS a little bit higher to really get over the curve. There are moments where you can just start spot healing somebody by casting heals directly at them if you wish, but let's say a group of friendlies are taking a bunch of damage, just pop bubbles on a bunch of them, pop your own offensive cooldown, and go as offensive on the boss as he is going on your group to try to maintain everybody. And I really like how all that came together. Disciplined Priests have a few talents in order to give you access to how you want to heal, and since I'm not really a healer main, I can't really comment much on the talents in terms of what's more effective or if there's a lot of option. But the baseline play of Disciplined Priests I think is something that might draw a lot of you that are primarily DPS players. If you're somebody who just wants to pop in a few dungeons, get a few of them knocked out for dailies or whatever, and you're a player priest, you can always hop into Disc Priest. You are all about trying to deal as much damage as possible. So if you already play Shadow or play casters in the past, then you probably know exactly what's going on. You're trying to hit the enemy as hard as you can, plus mix a few healing abilities, and for the most part you really have a pretty decent spec where you can kind of just do side content that's not way too challenging. But if you're somebody who wants to play the spec, I currently hear that on BFA, this priest are probably some of the best healers in the game. Now the last decision was a little bit hard because we have warriors, rogues, and death knights, and I really need to weigh them out. I need at least 2 specs that actually feel different, and for the sake of the video, because we're looking at most changes, I have to pick warriors. The reason I pick warriors is because arms is getting a huge changes to its playstyle. You're still gonna hit your enemies with mortal strikes and slam them on free time. You will now actually be able to use the ability of overpower in order to empower your next mortal strikes. Instead of having a buff for recklessness or battle cry, because all these abilities are getting renamed, so I have to pick one name or the other, you won't have anything like that. You won't really have any self buffs, but you will be able to simply do constant damage all the time. Colossus Smash will be your basic big cooldown. Your Colossus Smash the enemy, they're taking a bunch of damage, slam as much damage into them as possible, and then have to wait until Colossus smashes back up. It's almost like old school Boomkins or Shadow Priest. You didn't really have any abilities to self-buff you just always did good damage. So when you combine abilities together, build up enough resources, and then really try to burst through an enemy, you can control whenever you have damage without having to wait for that one big one-shot button to finally come off of cooldown. So that's part of what Arms Warriors are going to be all about, and I feel like with their changes and the playstyle with buffing your Mortal Strikes and Blade Storm being actually a pretty powerful tool, AoE or single target, I feel like the spec has enough changes in order to add it into this list. The other spec I will take a look at is Fury Warriors. Prot Warriors have had a lot of changes to them, so I feel like on Prot alone, you could just add Warriors in there, but I'd rather talk about Fury. Fury are still going to be about building rage and spending rage, but this is one of the specs that gone through a lot of controversial changes going from Legion into BFA. The GCD thing originally locked the spec out, having so many buffs to maintain and trying to use them at the same time was just near impossible, and the spec went through so much grief left and right until it finally got reworked to completely ignore the GCD mechanic altogether. It's a less CD reliant spec now, so it has a little more consistency. It is a lot faster in terms of its original playstyle. And if you thought that current Fury was all about just trying to get into the enemy and trying to pop all your cooldowns and slam through them as much as possible, the spec feels even faster in terms of the GCD component that's being added to BFA. It feels a little more consistent. Abilities like Rage and Blow no longer need Enrage. They're playing around a little bit more with your resource generation or Fury, and whenever you Enrage, you're all about haste now instead of getting extra auto attack speed and extra damage. So you will really end up playing around haste. You'll really end up playing with your offensive cooldowns, which play around with your Rage generation now. So the spec has a lot of talent changes, a lot of baseline changes that are different. You're not just trying to buff yourself as much as possible. You're really just trying to spend Rage, build it, spend it, and build it, spend it, and build it, making the spec a little more consistent. You're less cooldown reliant, but a lot of your talents allow you different opportunities for whether you want to be cooldown reliant or be able to get your cooldowns back faster or have more powerful cooldowns, or if you want to be more consistent, do you want to be more proc based, do you want to be more auto attack energy building, or do you want your Enrage to happen a lot more often. So it really does offer you a few more playstyles that I really did like. But then again, this is why I would really want to highlight Fury, because that's a spec that's getting few amount of changes, but Warriors would end up being on the list regardless, simply because of prod. Anyway guys, thank you so much for watching this video. This one ended up being a bit longer because we actually have some changes to talk about compared to classes that are barely getting any changes to BFA. I'd like to hear you guys' thoughts and comments. Are you going to be playing any of these classes, and are you somebody who's playing those classes in Legion right now and just cannot wait for the next transition into BFA to relearn how to play the same class and same spec, or are you somebody who's going to be dropping a certain class or spec for one of these new classes because yours might not be getting enough changes? I'd like to hear if you got anybody of those people in that boat in the comment section below. As always guys, if you enjoyed this video, go ahead and give it a like. If you enjoy what we do on the channel, subscribe to the channel, and if you're going to subscribe, you might as well hit the notification bell because the YouTube subscribe system just doesn't work regardless. Thank you guys so much for watching, hope you enjoyed, and I'll see all of you guys in another video.